In any life, we have highs and lows, light and dark, wins and losses. What happens when we encounter that moment in time when what happens next could change everything? Join us as we step into another person's inspirational moment and see how we can connect their experience to ours. This is Greg Stevens, and you're listening to A Shot of Inspiration. Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Stevens, the host of another Shot of Inspiration. My Quaker Heineken sidekick and overall helper, Finley, is on sabbatical today, but will be with us next time. Today's guest is someone who's mastered the art of transforming her life experience into lasting influence and income. Aurora Winter is a successful entrepreneur, best-selling author, TV writer and producer, and the founder of www.samepagepublishing.com. Her award-winning book includes Turn Words into Wealth and Magic Mystery and the Multiverse. Using her expertise in film and neuroscience, she helps people tell memorable stories that build brands, books, and businesses. Aurora, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Oh, it's so great to be here with you, Greg. I've been so looking forward to this.
I have too. I met Aurora. We just hit it off, and she gave me so many good insights. I've got some ideas for a movie, TV series, and she invited me out to Banff, and I couldn't make it. Tell me a little about what you did in Banff, just to kick things off.
Oh, it was so exciting. We went to the Banff Media Festival. The only thing that could have made it better would be if you had joined us there, Greg. So what I do is I have some award-winning books, but also I help clients with their books. So Banff is all about connecting intellectual property or IP with producers, distributors, and broadcasters. So I was absolutely thrilled. I have a fantasy series, a young adult fantasy series called Magic Mystery and the Multiverse. This is the first book. It won Reader's Choice Award Best Book for Teens. The second book is called The Secret Multiverse Academy. And the third book in the trilogy, Multiverse Mayhem, is coming out this summer. So I thought now is the time that I'm ready to really push forward on the TV project. So it has interest for a 12-part series from BBC. And I connected with Canada's largest and most respected production company, Blue Ant Media, and actually just had a follow-up call with them yesterday. So we're in discussion, so it's moving forward. If Blue Ant comes on board plus the BBC, that could be a go. That could be a green light. So that's pretty exciting. And then I have a client who's got legal thrillers. And again, we connected with the producer and an agent who are quite interested in that property. So it's not like you have one meeting and you have a deal and Tom Cruise is starring the next day. It's a bit of a process, but it is super, super exciting. And one of the things I love to emphasize is the value of IP or intellectual property. It goes beyond books, beyond TED Talks. There's coaching programs you can create. But hey, why not also consider feature films or TV series as you are?
Yeah, I love it. Also, you're not just doing that. I want to talk about before we got started recording today, you talked about a YouTube channel that you put together.
That's right. I'm always trying to be strategic. As you can see, I have a Strategic Basics sign behind me. I have a new YouTube channel called Strategic Basics. And this year, 2025, I thought strategically about marketing. Okay, so here's what I noticed. Everything is really shifting with AI, and besides, things are always changing, especially with Trump at the helm. Every day it seems to be changing. Most people who are aware of marketing have been thinking for many years about SEO or search engine optimization. But I noticed my own habits have changed. I don't search on Google anymore. I search on ChatGPT. And I'm not alone, right? So SEO is not going to be a driver. It's not going to be about Google. It's going to be about AI search. So I thought, how do we optimize AI search? And the other two bits of information that I think everybody should be aware of is YouTube is the #2 search engine. So if you are an expert, if you solve problems, you really would be well served to have content on YouTube. So I already have the Aurora Winter YouTube channel, but I optimized the Strategic Basics. We now have over 6,000 subscribers and we started it just over a month ago. So that's pretty good. And
Great.
usually twice a week we put out an episode, and what it's about is breaking news turned into business breakthroughs. So for example, this week I did a piece on the new best-selling book called Apple in China. So it was very interesting to read that book and look at the strategy that kind of blew up in Apple's face of going into China because now they have lost, it would appear, control as Chinese just knock off products or renegotiate when they have leverage. And Apple went in there, trained their teams, trained people, invested billions of dollars, but they were renters. Okay. And then from that, I expand into a more general conversation of I've been knocked off. My books have been stolen actually on the Apple platform. David Goggins, who is a self-published author, he wrote the book Can't Hurt Me. He actually took Amazon to court because he had so many knockoffs. And so it expanded into a general conversation beyond just the book, Apple in China, with some business takeaways for people to consider about IP. Okay, so all of that being said, strategically, why did I do that? I think there are so many great podcasts, and I didn't want to compete in a super saturated space. And there are shows like Russell Brand's who are more entertainment or like the show Valuetainment. So I thought that was much less crowded. So I thought breaking news plus business breakthroughs, that's a way for me to have an infinite supply of stories, but they're always new stories. So they will be very interesting. And then I'm making a video book from it just because I like to be on the leading edge. So then what's the number 3 search engine? It's Amazon. What's the difference between YouTube and Amazon? Obviously, Amazon has less of a search engine than YouTube, but the important distinction, as I'm sure you are aware as a best-selling author, when people go to Amazon, they're ready to buy. When people go to YouTube, they're looking for free answers, but that can be a way for them to discover a thought leader or discover a company that they're more interested in. So my strategy, which you can free to be inspired by or borrow, is about doubling down on YouTube, having a face, because I think with AI, I think we want to double down on being human so people can see my face, although we use AI to make it the videos more interesting, and then having books on Amazon where that's my typical thing. People read, turn words into wealth, and
I was gonna
all
say
of
to
it.
myself, turns words into wealth. You sent me this book. Thank you. I have found it to be so insightful. As I wrote a book and launched it in January, but I wish I would have had this a little before that. I battled a lot with some of the internal questions you have of yourself, also putting things off, procrastinating. There's a lot of things I read in here. It's like, yeah, you hit it right there. You hit it right there. And I even wrote down a couple of things I wanted to discuss because, folks, can't you see why she's so inspiring? Aurora, what I see in your life when I talk to you is movement and it's
Mm.
going forward. And you just have that light and that ray to, I'm going forward. This is going to be fun. What's around the next corner? And so you've got so many things going on, but you seem to have it under control. Tell us your secret around that.
I think that will come in the more spiritual end of things. I'm just excited. I feel that we are all, this is my belief system, but I feel that we're all created in the image and likeness of God. And so, who is God? It's the ultimate creative force. So, whenever I allow the creative force to flow through me, whether it's an insight that I say on a coaching call with one of my clients, or whether I'm writing a book or recording a video, I'm energized. Yeah, and I feel I was terrified about AI about a year ago, but then when I started to lean into it, I just got, wow, there's so many things. Like my new YouTube channel, my son spends about 6 hours adding images to like a 10-minute video clip. But that would have taken him like 6 days before AI. And it makes it more valuable to the audience, more interesting, more fun, and it also feeds the part of me that really wants to produce film and television. Yeah. And I think this can be true for anyone. Like if you combine being of service with creating something that's meaningful to you, it doesn't have to be a book or a video or a podcast. It could be a garden, it could be dinner, it could be helping a child communicate better.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
create adding value. When you add value and you're of service in the creative zone, for me, that's a win.
Yeah. I love you're looking at adding value. We talked even a little about current events that were happening this morning. I was pulling out my garbage and my neighbor said, I hadn't seen him in a while. How you doing? I was asking how his job was. And next thing that came out of his mouth was the problem with the economy, the possible war, all the different things going on. And I sat there and I thought, wow, that's in his speaking right away. Nothing against it, but I thought, I don't want to spend time on that. Can I do anything about any of those? What I
Yeah.
can do something about is what I can control here, putting
Yeah.
a positive message out. Like you said, creating something, adding value to where I can here. What if everyone that heard these or beyond that started doing that every day? What would our world look like?
Yeah. I think that we are broadcasters.
Yeah.
Even if we're not broadcasting, I think we are always emanating our energy. So when you and I choose to be upbeat and positive and contributions and seek ways to contribute to others, it lifts up far more than the people that we actually just speak
Yeah.
to. I love the Stoic philosophy. I love Ralph Waldo Emerson. I think when we have the spotlight on ourselves, oh my God, what does this mean for me? You can quickly go through a rabbit hole of depression. But if you instead think, how can I serve? How can I help? How can I be an uplifter? Then your energy can shift and you can help other people
Yeah.
shift too. Yeah. In fact, I just went to another client of mine. His name's Dr. Mark Costas. He had an event in Dallas. There was about 1,000 people there. And you'd like one of the speakers was Ryan Holiday, who's famous for his books about Stoicism. My favorite is The Obstacle is the Way. And I just
That's
love
mine.
that. I love that book because every time one of my clients says, I don't know how to XYZ, I'm like, perfect. Now we know what the obstacle is. And that is the way that we need to discover. So instead of, I don't know how do I
Yeah.
XYZ, right?
Yeah.
I really loved the conference and I really enjoyed talking to Ryan Holiday. And I was even more excited about my client's book 'cause I'm like, this guy is so humble, but he's so successful and he's making such a difference. I feel honored to be
That's
part of his team to create his book.
That's so good. That's so good. Yeah, I was studying Stoicism for years, and then I ran across Ryan's book, and I just love how he writes. He's really good writer, and so I picked up the trilogy that he had on that, and just really loved it. Lives here close to me, and I live in Austin. He lives in Dripping Springs, just outside of town. Haven't met him though, so you
Not
had a
yet.
chance to meet him. That's great. I did want to ask you about a couple things. When I saw in the book, I was like, oh, that's really good. That's really good. So one of them was you were talking about pivoting. I love
Yeah.
that when you have to pivot and you're actually comparing entrepreneurs to hermit crabs. And I thought that was super because a hermit crab outgrows its shell and has to find a new one. And if you outgrow your shell, it's dangerous to stay there and you
Yeah.
become trapped. And I talked to someone the other day that said, I'm not going anywhere. I've got the golden handcuffs. And I had the golden handcuffs 25 years ago. And I'm sitting there just going, I've got to do something else. I had to break free of that. And I felt the freest I think I've ever felt the day I left out of that shell. Tell us more about why you compared it to that and what you've seen people do when they pivot out of that.
Oh, I love that you picked up on that. There's actually, if you go to on YouTube and you search hermit crabs getting out of their shell or whatever, you can see some pretty dramatic examples. So I've experienced, there's two things to note that apply to entrepreneurs. One, you keep growing. Hopefully, as a human being, you're learning, you're expanding your capacity, you're expanding your skill set. Every time you solve a new problem for yourself or your client, you get bigger, right? Because you're more and more capable. But your shell of your business or your team stays the same size until you choose to do something different. And eventually it's confining.
Yeah.
But what was also dramatic is when the little hermit crabs realize that they have the golden handcuffs, so to speak, within the shell that's too confining, then they have to go out and find a shell. But they're very vulnerable during that stage. And that's the same with us as entrepreneurs. When we finally go, okay, that's it for that business, time for the new business, we're super vulnerable because we leave behind a shell that worked, even though it's confining and doesn't serve us in our growth path. Finding the new shell. Then maybe somebody else is in that shell. You've got a competitor or there's a hole in that shell and you thought it was going to be good, but no, it's totally the wrong shell and you're at risk and you have to leave that bigger shell, but it's got a hole in it and go find another one. And I thought that is so like entrepreneurship. And I'm a slow learner, apparently, because usually I always stick with the business that's working a little longer than I should have. But I want to talk in a minute about ways to make your pivot faster, easier, and more confident. But then, like you, I have this sense of expansiveness once I get even just on the way to a new shell. But after I've done so many pivots, I've been in the yacht sales business, selling boats as tax shelters. I raised $5 million and started a film and television production company. I had a coach training company, and now I have a publishing company, and I work as a publishing mentor for people. So after doing pivots so many times, I finally go, it always works. So I guess it's going to work this time. But that only comes with history. Okay, so here's what I'd like to say about how to make the pivot faster and easier. But do you want to comment on that first?
No, I want to hear this, and because you've touched on a couple, because I want to talk about your publishing, self-publishing. There's a lot I want to get to.
Okay.
But please, no, give me.
All right, so I want to give you an example of one of my more recent pivots, not the very last pivot, because I think it's something that anybody can do. So I was in the coach training business. I was the founder of the Grief Coach Academy. So I was known, and my 12,000 email list all knew me as the founder of the Grief Coach Academy. People who are interested in help with grief are not the same people as this new business I was thinking. But more and more, my clients and acquaintances came to me and they said, how did you get on so many TV and radio shows? How did you write so many books? What's your marketing secret? I'm like, starting to hear that maybe people want help with their marketing, messaging, and publishing from me.
Mm-hmm.
I did the 90-day test. So I recommend if you want to pivot, give yourself 90 days and a very small budget to test the idea. It doesn't have to be a perfect fit. You're looking for the first edition of Gmail only had 3 features. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking for the 3-feature version of your new business, which may end up having 100 features over time, but you want to test that there's some kind of product market fit. So what I did, because I'm a good talker, or at least I like talking, is I had one of my friends who was then the director of coaching at Tony Robbins. He'd interviewed me before to his 100 coaches about how to help people who were dealing with heartbreak or divorce or death or grief. And he'd liked that. And I said, hey, do you want to interview me about marketing, messaging, and publishing? He's absolutely, because he knew my story, although most people didn't know that I'd been in a bunch of other businesses before. So I choreographed the interview. I gave him the questions. I liked the interview, transcribed it. It was only about a 90-minute call, turned it into a little tiny book because that's part of my skill set. And then I offered it to my list of 12,000 people for just the cost of shipping, $4.77. But that actually is quite significant because it's a buyer, not just somebody who's downloading your free ebook who will never open it. And then I gave a sequence of 5 videos, adding more value about how to build a marketing funnel, what is $1 million message, how to lean into that, how to do that. And then if you would like more help, you can sign up here at bookcall.biz and get a free business breakthrough call with me if you're interested in more help one-on-one with your book or your marketing or your messaging. So that little experiment in 90 days produced $250,000 of new business.
Wow.
So I'm like, okay, I guess the new business idea is a good one. So that 90-day period, though, that was like me coming out of the shell and running, but I didn't have a new shell yet. Yeah. But then I got into the new shell with at least confirmation of product market fit.
Proof of concept for sure.
Proof of concept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I've pivoted several times since then, but anybody can do that. Yeah. You don't even have to have an interviewer, although it works better because there's something alive about a conversation with somebody listening.
Yeah.
But you could record yourself or you could have somebody interview you. Or if you want VIP help, you can reach out to me at Same Page Publishing, make a short book, offer it. And then, this book has all the information that was in the little book, Marketing Fast Track, and a whole bunch more. But you don't have to do the full meal deal right away. Just an appetizer can work.
Absolutely. But I would tell you, if you're considering a book, actually really get this because it's a wealth of knowledge that I found to be spot on as I went through. You also talked about radical reading. And I love that because I love the book Radical Candor, anything called radical. I kind of love that. But radical reading, I've always believed leaders are readers. Now, not all leaders are readers, but the people I typically want to follow are big readers. And they actually put information in their mind. They might have read, like me, 100 books on communication. But when I get a book on communication, I'm going to read it just because I know there's going to be something I need to be reminded of, or I haven't learned yet, be able to say it in a different way. Tell me why the whole concept between that radical reading and that 90 minutes also before you go to bed, because I really like that. And I have to admit, I read sometimes before bed, but I think I'm going to make it my time to break down before I go to bed. Because sometimes I'll watch television with my wife and then we hit the sack. And then sometimes we'll read together. I just find you're right. When you read, you put that information. It's actually, I dream differently. I didn't start seeing that until I read that.
I'm glad that you're noticing that, Greg, because actually the neuroscience of watching TV versus reading is quite different.
Yeah.
We are passive when we're watching TV, but we are active. Our brains are active when we're reading. So I'm going to give everybody this 90-day challenge, which is in the book Turn Words into Wealth. So for 90 days, I would just love to inspire everybody to commit to this radical reading, radical writing, and radical review. So how that looks is to get more into the radical reading, I recommend if it's an everyday, gotta happen habit. But the other thing I would like to expand upon the radical part of it is I heard Ryan Holiday say this recently, so I'm going to be inspired by his wording, which actually came from somebody from the Naval Academy whose name escapes me right at the moment. But he said you should read like a spy in an enemy's camp. Read like a spy in the enemy's camp. So what does this mean? It's inviting you to read things that you disagree with, to read things that are not in your communication series of books, but maybe poetry, or read about politics, or read Marxism if you completely disagree with them, or read biographies.
Right.
So I think there's so much to be learned. And in fact, Ryan Holiday had this opportunity to speak at the Naval Academy. He was hired to speak at the Naval Academy. And part of his talk was about the 300 some odd books that they had just removed from the Naval Academy library. So they canceled his talk an hour before he was to go on stage. So he gave the talk for free on YouTube. So you can find it on YouTube. It's an excellent talk. And his point, which I completely agree with, is that we shouldn't take books out of the library that disagree with mainstream convention. We should be able to read widely so that we understand other people's points of view, and that may even save your life, as it did in this fellow's case. But that's too much of a story. Okay, so that's radical reading. Radical writing every day for 5 minutes. Right, it could just be blah. And then every week, once a week, review what you've written and what you've read to pull the gold from it. And what I am going to go on a limb and promise to you that if you do this every day for 90 days, your life will change. And I would love to hear about it. And if it doesn't change, then you can complain to me because I'll be totally shocked. I noticed that when I did this for 90 days, I started to notice that there were things that I intended or that I had prayed for. And then when they came 90 days later, I'd failed to be grateful because it was too much time. I had forgotten that I'd prayed for that or that I'd had that intention. And so I started to realize that life is for me, that everything is happening to help me as long as I show up with this attitude of being of service.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to add something to what you just said. I encourage you to read, just like she's talking about. And what Aurora just said, write for 5 minutes. That's not a long time. What I will encourage you to do, if everyone can see right there, I've talked about this before. My friend wrote the book called Take Your Own Advice.
Huh.
And it's actually 30 days of questions. So it
Mm.
has a little piece in there, and then it asks you to write. What I found out, folks, I went through this. I did one a day, and I wrote for about 5 minutes. It was real simple, but the questions were, what advice would I give to myself? And I wrote it out, and I didn't look at it again. And then I went to a friend's house in Colorado, and I took it with me, and we sat down and I told him about the book. He said, what'd you write? I pulled it out. I hadn't looked at it. And I read it, and his book became a book of my own advice. And my friend was just like, those are brilliant. And I was like, I didn't know what I was writing. I was just free flowing when it came out. And that would be a structure to do it in. Or you might want to just pull out a journal and do it. But I agree with you. I think writing for 5 minutes and then going back and looking at it, you won't believe some of the insights you can have from your own writing.
Maybe your filled in book can be like Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. That's a bestseller on your
Yes,
hands there.
absolutely. Absolutely.
When we allow ourselves to be tapped in, we're very wise.
Yeah.
But then we get caught up in the day and we forget to take our own advice.
Yeah, we do. And
Okay, just one more thing on that. Sorry, I
oh,
didn't mean to cut
please.
you off. One more thing on that. I challenge you that as you're doing this, you will start to notice some patterns where you're complaining. So by 30 days, by 60 days, but definitely by 90 days, you must stop complaining and do something about what you're complaining about. Or if it's not something that can be changed, you got to take a deep breath and just accept and forgive it. So when I first did this, which later became the book From Heartbreak to Happiness, I was complaining that my husband was dead. Now, that's grief, and there's nothing that was going to bring him from the grave. So I just needed to lean into learning how to let go of that, forgive, and accept that. But then I was also complaining about some other more trivial things that I needed to have a difficult conversation about, or I needed to change a habit, or whatever the case may be. Just notice if you're complaining, and then also notice things you can be grateful for.
I love that. And I just want to touch on that. You did lose your husband and you became a grief counselor after you went through your grieving process. And that's what led you to all of the things I think you're doing now. Would you like to share anything about going through the obstacle that you faced during that time?
You know what? I feel prompted to share a dream because I've kept a journal since I was 9. So I wrote, after he died, I wrote, as I had the habit of doing, in my journal every day. And one day I wrote about this dream, and later I put it in my Diary of Healing, which is the book From Heartbreak to Happiness. So let me just share. It was the second anniversary of my husband's death, and I still felt so bereft and so alone and so wronged by God, by this situation. And so then my husband reached out the only way he could, which was in a dream. And we met in an airport. Everybody's busily going on their business. And we met at those stupid little plastic tables. And I slammed my fist on the table and I'm like, how could you? How could you leave our son without his father? How could you abandon me? Just like, how could you betray us? And then he asked me 3 questions, and these questions changed my life. He said, if you had it to do all over again, would you still marry me? I thought about all the good times, the businesses we'd started, sailing boats. I'm like, yeah, I'd still marry you. And then he asked the second question, which was, if you had it to do all over again, would you still have our son? And this time the answer was faster. Absolutely. He's the light of my life, my joy, and my blessing. But then he asked me the third question. This is the one that changed my life. He said, given those 2 answers, would you want to know that I would die young? And I gasped in the dream. And I searched my heart for the answer, and I discovered the answer was no. I would not want to taint the joy that we did have with dread.
Here.
And that shifted everything. It allowed me to accept my fate as if I had chosen it. And that was a great breakthrough.
I love that. I love that. What an insight. That's that was gold. Thank you so much. That is a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that with us. Let me ask you, I'm going to shift it a little because I love where we were. And I also believe that there are people listening right now, they just connected with your story. They connected with you. Other people have stories. They need to write books. They need to get positive messages out there. And some people say, I don't know a publisher or self-publishing. I had this whole idea, oh, don't want to self-publish. And then I read your comments about David Goggins and I kind of laughed about it. It's so true. That's what I finally came up with. And I did a hybrid group that I worked with, but it was in essence self-publishing, but I'm happy because I kept all my rights to it and it doesn't really change anything. You get the book written and instead of it being out in here, it's out there. One of the best feelings I ever had is I got it out of me. When I had
Yeah.
my book launch, someone asked me, what was the hardest thing? I said, I didn't think I'd hate my book so much because it festered inside me too long. I could have
Mm.
written it years ago. Now that I got it out, I have a new love relationship with it and it's out of me. I don't have any anxiety going on. So talk a little about how someone, why they should self-publish and how they can get in touch with you. And we talked about it a couple times, but I want to make sure people reach out to you and support you and support themselves in finding someone that can help them do that.
I like the story that you just said, Greg. I feel like you know if you're pregnant with a story. You don't really want to be pregnant more than 9 months, right? You want to get the baby, you want to give the baby
Yes,
ample
that's a
time
great
to
analogy.
grow, but then you got to have the baby come and be
Yeah, I
born.
think it was a labor for
No.
15 years.
Oh, if you wait too long, it's not a good scenario. I want to tell the story about David Goggins, but I believe you know, but also
Yeah.
the listeners know if they have a book in them. And I want to emphasize that most people get stuck. Well, there are a bunch of reasons they get stuck, but one of the reasons they get stuck is they at first think it's all about publishing the book. And I would love you to lean into no, the first step is actually to reclaim your own story and discover the gold in all of the mud. Just like that dream that I shared. There was some gold there and it shifted me. And I bet if you're listening to this wonderful podcast, that you have experienced some things that were traumatic, but then there were also some breakthroughs. So the first thing to lean into is just discovering your own story. Most people don't understand how valuable and cathartic it is to go through your business history or personal history and pull out something and go, yuck, and then wash it off and go, whoa, there's some diamonds in there. What do you know? There's some platinum, there's some gold, and then take that part and let the mud go. So that's one of the things I love helping people do because I love seeing the gold in somebody's story and pulling it forth because most people they have no idea how awesome they are. And they just dismiss the parts of them that are so extraordinary because they've been that way for 20 years and they just take, oh, that's obvious. No, it isn't. Like you are pretty amazing. I love that. And I also love, because of my experience with grief, my own personal experience in coaching people through grief, I'm very comfortable and at ease discussing and navigating the owies in life because there usually are some hidden gems hidden within that. And also, like you said a moment ago, I think you thought some people connected because I shared a vulnerable story. In your book, you don't want to just be the expert. Somebody who's always a know it all expert is like off putting, but somebody who combines the sharing their hero's journey, their struggle, the times where they almost tripped up. I could just read Shoe Dog, which is the Nike story. And it's the hero's journey. It's really crafted. Oh my God, is he going to make it? Oh my God, he's going to go bankrupt. Oh my God, the government's suing him for $25 million for unpaid duty. Ah! And then the very last 10% of the book is then we made it. Most people who write their first book, almost all of the book is that last 10%. And it can be off-putting. We want to have both the witness or the hero dealing with challenges, fighting dragons. And then we also want to say, this book is my experiences, but here's what the gold is for you. Here's the takeaway. Here's that's going to help you. Okay, so if you focus on that part first, and I'd be glad to help you if you want help. And then the second part is, okay, the more publishing part, which is to find how do these stories help others? What is the problem this book solves? Is this really one book or is it two? To honor that process of being pregnant with an idea, but then to strategically decide what is the first book. So for example, I just helped a client publish a book called The Vitality Solution, and already she's got like a workbook because she wanted to separate the book from the workbook. I'm helping a client right now work on a book called Rich, Fit, and Fulfilled, which she's all wiggly about the title. And I'm like, it's not about you being rich, fit, and fulfilled, although you are. It's about helping others become rich, fit, and fulfilled. And he's very comfortable sharing all of his struggles. So it's going to be a great book. Okay, so then the second step is around the strategic publishing. Most first-time authors spend 3.5 years writing their book, which is tragic because they've been pregnant for way more than 9 months. But then they usually drop the ball at the finish line. They don't do market research to find out what categories the book goes in. They don't make the title very clear what problem they are solving and who this book is for. And they don't usually sprinkle in to the book stories of how they help people. So you want the book to be an appetizer for your whole business, which you have seen in Turn Words into Wealth. I tell some stories of my clients and their success raising money or doing TED Talks or publishing books. So if you read Turn Words into Wealth, you will see some examples of that. And then if people want my help with their publishing journey, I want to be clear that at this point, I'm doing the 80-20 rule, and then I did the 80-20 rule on the 20%. So I only
64%. Yeah.
64-4. Yeah, you read that in the book. So
I've heard it too a couple of times for the people recently as well.
spreading the
coming
message.
up, it's come up 3 times this week with 3 different people.
Wow, I wonder if they've read my book because I hadn't heard anybody talking about it before, but this book was
Well, I think
published.
they probably did.
Probably because I'm chatting all the time. So at Same Page Publishing, we exclusively help leaders, experts, and entrepreneurs who are already making a difference and already have something successful going, make a bigger difference. So because I want to be clear that investing and getting help with their book, they're going to get a 10x ROI. So I'm not the person to help you with your poetry book, or I'm not the person to help you when you don't have a business or you don't have any expertise. At this point, Same Page Publishing is only helping that successful entrepreneur because that's where we can make the biggest difference.
Yeah.
And
that's where
you can go to samepagepublishing.com and see examples of people we've helped.
samepagepublishing.com. Please, folks, please take some action. Sorry, we're going to need to go, but I would love to have you on again because I know there's so many things we could talk about. I'd like to talk about deeper as you get your YouTube channel built up even more, and any of the programs you're having on television or movies. Would love to hear much more about that. So this is just the beginning of a whole new friendship. I really appreciate you being willing to be on the show today. I really do.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. And I want to just explain the reason I called it Same Page Publishing is because I come on the same page as my clients. We're working together, collaborating as a team to create a best-selling, award-winning book that builds their business brand and makes a big difference.
Thank you so much. So, folks, if you're sitting on a story, a message, or a mission, and you're not sure how to share it, go get her book, Turn Your Words into Wealth, and connect with Aurora on LinkedIn and our website, aurorawinter.com, for more tools and support. As always, I enjoyed this episode. Please, if you enjoyed this episode, please like or subscribe and share it with a friend, and that'll help us expand our positive message to those who need to hear it. Thanks for listening. I'm Greg Stevens, and as always, be bold, be courageous, and respectfully speak your truth. See you next time. Thanks, Aurora. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of A Shot of Inspiration. If you like this or any of our other episodes, make sure you rate it and share it with a friend. This is Greg Stevens, and we look forward to being with you next time. Until then, be bold, be courageous, and respectfully speak your truth.